hospital that can appear anywhere in a huge country. Operating rooms where lives are saved on the go. Doctors working amid the rumble of wheels and the whistle of a steam locomotive. This is not science fiction. It is the real story of the USSR's medical trains, a unique phenomenon in world medicine. From the first medical cars of the Russian Empire to the high-tech trains of modern Russia, it has been a journey of more than a century. This is the story of the heroic deeds of medical professionals who turned the railroad into a lifeline for millions of people. The medical trains of the USSR became a symbol of accessible healthcare in the world's largest country. Subscribe to the channel to learn more amazing stories from our past. And in the comments, discuss whether you think medical trains are still relevant today, in the age of digital technology and telemedicine. At the end of the 19th century, Russian railways were developing rapidly, connecting remote corners of the vast empire with steel rails. But along with technical progress came an understanding of new challenges. How to provide medical care in regions where the nearest doctor was hundreds of miles away. How could qualified assistance be delivered to the site of railway accidents or epidemics? The idea of creating mobile medical facilities based on the railway did not arise by chance. Already during the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878, military medics were faced with the need to quickly evacuate the wounded over long distances. Ordinary freight cars were adapted for transporting patients, but these were only temporary measures, far from providing full medical care. The first attempts to create specialized medical cars were made in the 1880s. Engineers and doctors worked on projects that would allow not only to transport patients, but also to provide them with full medical care on the way. These developments became the forerunners of future medical trains. The activities of the Russian Red Cross Society, founded in 1867, gave a special impetus to the development of medical transport. The organization actively studied foreign experience and adapted it to Russian conditions. Doctors and engineers understood that in a country with such vast distances, mobile medicine was a matter of national security. The first designs for medical trains envisaged the creation of real mobile hospitals. They were to include operating rooms, wards for seriously ill patients, pharmacies, kitchens, and rooms for medical staff. It was a revolutionary idea for its time, a hospital that could come to the patient rather than the other way around. The technical implementation of the idea required serious engineering solutions. The cars had to be equipped with heating, ventilation, and lighting systems. Particular attention was paid to smooth running. The wounded should not suffer from shaking during transport. Special suspended beds and shock absorption systems were developed. By the beginning of the 20th century, Russian engineers had accumulated enough experience to create fully fledged medical trains. The country's railway network had developed to such an extent that mobile hospitals could reach almost any point in the empire. All that remained was to wait for an event that would require the mass application of this innovative medical technology. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 became the first serious test for medical trains. It was then that all the advantages of mobile medicine became apparent, but the shortcomings of the first designs also became obvious. The experience of this conflict formed the basis for the further improvement of medical trains. World War I was a real test for Russian medicine. The scale of the conflict required radically new approaches to providing medical care to the wounded. It was during this period that medical trains evolved from experimental projects into a vital part of the military medical service. By the beginning of the war in August 1914, The Russian Empire had several dozen medical trains of various designs. Most of them were based on converted passenger trains, but specially built medical cars with modern equipment had already appeared. A typical wartime medical train consisted of 10 to 12 cars. The train always included cars with wards for bedridden patients, a car for the lightly wounded, an operating car, a pharmacy car, a kitchen, cars for medical personnel, and luggage compartments for medical supplies. Such a train could accommodate up to 200 wounded at a time. The operating cars played a special role. They were true marvels of engineering at the time. They were equipped with electric lighting, a ventilation system, sterilization equipment, and all the necessary surgical instruments. Operations were performed while the train was in motion, which required surgeons to be particularly skilled and calm. The medical staff of the sanitary trains were selected with particular care. Doctors had to possess not only professional knowledge, but also the ability to work in extreme conditions. Nurses underwent special training to work on moving trains. Many of them were graduates of prestigious medical institutes and communities of nurses. The logistics of operating medical trains was an extremely difficult task. The trains ran between the front lines and rear hospitals, picking up the wounded from frontline dressing stations and delivering them to large medical centers. The journey from the front line to the central hospitals could take several days, during which the train's medical staff fought for the life of each patient. Winter conditions created additional difficulties. Heating systems did not always cope with the cold, medicines froze, and frostbite was added to combat injuries. In summer, the main problem was the heat and unsanitary conditions, which contributed to the spread of infections. Hundreds of thousands of wounded soldiers passed through the medical trains during the war. Statistics showed that the mortality rate among those transported in medical trains was significantly lower than with other methods of evacuation. This proved the effectiveness of the mobile hospital concept. By the end of the war, medical trains had become an integral part of the military medical system. The experience of their use was carefully studied and systematized. Many doctors and nurses who had served on wartime medical trains continued to develop this field in peacetime, laying the foundations for the Soviet system of medical trains. The revolutionary events of 1917 and the ensuing Civil War radically changed the fate of Russian medical trains. In conditions of political instability and military chaos, mobile hospitals became even more important for saving human lives. After the October Revolution, many medical trains ended up in the hands of various political forces. The Red Army, the White Movement, the interventionists, all the warring parties understood the strategic importance of medical transport. The trains passed from hand to hand, were refitted and adapted to new tasks. From the very beginning, the Soviet government paid special attention to organizing medical support for the army. People's Commissar of Health, Nikolai Alexandrovich Semashko, personally oversaw the creation of new medical trains. The task was not simply to restore the system destroyed by the war, but to create a fundamentally new, more effective structure. During the Civil War, medical trains often operated in the front-line zone, under constant threat of artillery fire and enemy air raids. Medical personnel showed true heroism, continuing to treat the wounded even under fire. Many trains were equipped with armored cars to protect the most important medical departments. A special feature of this period was the appearance of specialized medical trains. Trains were created for the treatment of infectious patients, surgical trains, and laboratory trains. Epidemics of typhus, cholera, and other diseases that spread during the war required new approaches to mobile medicine. The Red Cross continued its activities, but now under the control of the Soviet authorities. Many pre-revolutionary specialists remained in the system, passing on their experience to a new generation of doctors. Training courses were created for medical personnel, specifically for work in mobile hospitals. The technical equipment of the trains gradually improved, despite the general devastation in the country. Soviet engineers developed new types of medical cars that were better suited to the harsh conditions of the Civil War. Particular attention was paid to the autonomy of the trains. They had to operate for long periods of time without replenishing supplies. Female medical personnel played a key role in the work of the medical trains during this period. Many of them were participants in the revolutionary movement and consciously chose to serve in the most dangerous conditions. Their professionalism and dedication saved thousands of lives. By the end of the Civil War, the USSR's medical train system was a well-organized structure with a clear hierarchy and specialization. The experience of working in the extreme conditions of wartime was summarized and formed the basis for the further development of mobile medicine in the Soviet Union. The statistics showed impressive results. The mortality rate among the wounded evacuated by medical trains decreased several times compared to the period of World War I. This achievement was made possible by better organization, modern equipment, and highly qualified personnel. The 1920s and 1930s were a period of rapid development for medical trains in the USSR. The new economic policy, followed by industrialization, created the conditions for a qualitative leap in the development of mobile medicine. The Soviet leadership viewed medical trains as an important tool for solving healthcare problems in a vast country. The first five-year plan from 1928 to 1932 provided for a significant expansion of the medical train network. It was planned to create specialized trains to serve the five-year plan construction sites, new industrial centers, and areas of virgin land development. Medicine had to keep pace with the industrialization of the country. Railway design bureaus were tasked with developing fundamentally new types of medical cars. Soviet engineers studied the best international experience, but sought to create their own, more advanced models. Particular attention was paid to the unification and standardization of medical equipment. During this period, the first highly specialized medical trains appeared. Trains were created to combat tuberculosis, venereal diseases, and eye diseases. Tuberculosis trains were equipped with X-ray equipment and laboratories for diagnosis, which revolutionized the fight against this social disease. Dispensary trains, which regularly visited remote areas of the country, played a special role. They conducted mass medical examinations, vaccinations, and health education work. For many residents of remote villages and workers' settlements, these trains were the only opportunity to receive qualified medical care. The training system for medical train personnel was radically reorganized. Special courses and departments were created in medical institutes. Doctors studied not only medicine, but also the specifics of working on rail transport, the psychology of working in a closed team, and the basics of technical maintenance of medical equipment. The material and technical base of medical trains was constantly improving. Trains with electric lighting, central heating, and modern ventilation systems appeared. Operating cars were equipped with the latest surgical equipment, including the first models of electrocoagulators and X-ray machines. An important achievement of this period was the creation of a radio communication system between medical trains and stationary medical institutions. This made it possible to coordinate the work of mobile hospitals, obtain consultations from leading specialists, and quickly plan train routes. The geography of the medical trains operations expanded significantly. Trains ran from Karelia to Central Asia, from the western borders to the Far East. They played a particularly important role in the development of Siberia and the Far East, where the density of medical facilities was extremely low. By the end of the 1930s, the USSR had one of the most developed medical train systems in the world. More than 100 trains of various purposes served the country's needs for mobile medical care. This experience proved invaluable on the eve of the severe trials of the Great Patriotic War. The technical design of Soviet medical trains in the 1930s represented the pinnacle of engineering thought at the time. Each train was a true marvel of technology, combining the achievements of railway transport, medical equipment, and construction technologies into a single functional organism. A typical medical train consisted of 14 to 16 specialized cars, each of which performed a strictly defined function. The lead car served as the administrative center, housing the train manager's office, radio station, and dispatch service. It also contained a small library of medical literature and an archive of medical records. The operating car was the heart of any medical train. Its design provided maximum protection from vibrations and jolts. Special suspension and shock absorption systems ensured a smooth ride even on uneven sections of track. The operating table was equipped with hydraulic stabilizers that compensated for any movement of the train. The operating room was lit by powerful electric lamps with reflectors that provided bright, even light. The ventilation system created excess pressure in the room, preventing dust and germs from entering. The walls were covered with a special enamel that was easy to disinfect. The sterilization department was located in the adjacent car and was connected to the operating room by an airtight passage. It housed autoclaves, dry heat sterilizers, and other equipment for disinfecting instruments. Steam sterilizers were powered by the train's central boiler. The ward cars were divided into several categories depending on the condition of the patients. Cars for seriously ill patients were equipped with individual beds with adjustable positions. Special holders for blood transfusion systems and oxygen supply to each bed turned the car into a real intensive care unit. The carriage for the slightly wounded was equipped with bunk beds and could accommodate up to 40 people at a time. It also housed a dressing station and a small treatment room. The lighting was adjusted so as not to disturb the patient's rest at night. The laboratory car was a modern clinical laboratory on wheels. Microscopes, centrifuges, thermostats, and chemical reagents made it possible to perform a full range of tests on the go. The X-ray machine was located in a specially shielded compartment in compliance with all radiation safety measures. The pharmacy car was equipped with shelves for medicines, refrigeration units for storing drugs requiring low temperatures, and a laboratory for preparing medicines. Strict accounting and quality control of medicines was ensured by a specially trained pharmacist. The kitchen and dining car was adapted for the preparation of dietary meals. Electric stoves, steamers, and refrigeration equipment made it possible to prepare food in accordance with the medical indications of each patient. Separate sections were designated for the preparation of baby food and food for patients with various gastrointestinal diseases. The living cars for the staff were equipped with sleeping places, wash basins, and dressing rooms. There was also a recreation room and a small office for medical conferences and the discussion of complex cases. On June 22, 1941, the most terrible war in human history began. Nazi Germany's attack on the Soviet Union required the mobilization of all the country's resources, including the medical train system. From the first days of the war, mobile hospitals became one of the most important elements in saving the lives of Soviet soldiers. At the beginning of the war, the USSR had 150 medical trains for various purposes. However, the peacetime specialization of many trains had to be changed urgently. Tuberculosis and venereal disease trains were converted to treat the wounded, and children's medical trains were turned into adult surgical hospitals. Already in the first weeks of the war, it became clear that the existing number of medical trains was catastrophically insufficient. The Soviet government decided to urgently deploy additional trains. Passenger and even freight cars were converted for medical needs around the clock at railway factories. The first months of the war, when the Red Army was retreating under enemy pressure, were a particularly difficult test. Medical trains operated under constant air raids and artillery fire. Many trains were lost, along with their personnel and wounded, during the bombing of railway junctions. The heroism of medical workers during those days was beyond description. Doctors and nurses continued to operate to the sound of air raid sirens, not leaving the operating rooms even during air raids. Many trains continued to travel along destroyed sections of track, risking being hit by shelling or blown up by mines. The evacuation of hospitals from the front line required the mass use of medical trains to transport patients deep into the country. Trains ran non-stop, delivering the wounded to rear medical facilities in the Urals, Siberia, and Central Asia. The capacity of the railways was stretched to the limit. Lightly wounded trains played a special role, transporting soldiers who were able to return to duty after brief treatment to specialized hospitals closer to the front. This made it possible to replenish losses in the troops more quickly and save transport resources for the evacuation of the seriously wounded over long distances. Supplying medical trains with medicines and equipment became a serious problem in the first months of the war. Many pharmaceutical companies were located in the occupied zone or had been evacuated. Every ampule of anesthetic, every bandage, every tablet had to be economized. Women made up the bulk of the medical staff on the trains. Many of them were mobilized from civilian medical institutions and had no experience working in military conditions. However, they quickly adapted to the harsh realities of war and showed remarkable resilience and professionalism. By the end of 1941, the medical train system had been completely reorganized for military purposes. New routes were created, the principles of staffing trains were changed, and new methods of treating specific combat injuries were developed. The experience of the first months of the war revealed both the strengths of the Soviet mobile medical system and areas for further improvement. The war brought to the fore a whole galaxy of remarkable women doctors, whose names are forever inscribed in the history of medical trains. They worked in unbearably difficult conditions, often under enemy fire, saving the lives of Soviet soldiers and showing remarkable courage and professionalism. Anna Stepanovna Morozova, head of medical train number 23, became a legendary figure in military medicine. Before the war, she worked as a regular district doctor in a town near Moscow. But mobilization brought her to the medical train, where she quickly demonstrated outstanding organizational skills. Under her leadership, the train evacuated more than 12,000 wounded soldiers. Morozova distinguished herself during the defense of Stalingrad. Her train operated directly in the combat zone, transporting the wounded directly from the front lines. The train was repeatedly hit by artillery fire, but Anna Stepanovna did not allow the loading of the wounded to be stopped, personally directing the work under fire. Maria Ivanovna Serova, head nurse of train number 41, became famous for her skill in providing emergency care. She developed her own methods for stopping bleeding and treating wounds, which were then adopted by other medical trains. Over the years of the war, Thousands of wounded passed through her hands. The winter trips of 1941 to 1942 were particularly difficult. The heating system did not always cope with the cold, medicines froze, and the medics themselves worked in felt boots and quilted jackets. Serova managed to organize the work so that her department did not lose a single wounded person to the cold. Ekaterina Fyodorovna Belova, a surgeon on train number 17, became famous for performing the most complex operations while the train was in motion. She was one of the few female surgeons of that time and proved that gender is not an obstacle to working in extreme conditions. During the war, she performed more than 2,000 operations. Belova developed original methods of operating in conditions of constant shaking and limited space. Her technique for securing the patient and instruments allowed her to perform even abdominal operations while the train was moving. Many of her innovations were later implemented in other medical trains. Lydia Alexandrovna Kozlova, head of the pharmacy car on train number 8, showed remarkable ingenuity in conditions of acute shortage of medicines. She learned to make many medicines from improvised means, to replace expensive drugs with simpler analogs, and to use the available supplies as effectively as possible. Her experience in treating infectious complications of wounds was especially valuable. During the war, antibiotics were very rare, and Kozlova actively used herbal antiseptics, physiotherapy methods, and diet therapy. The mortality rate from infections on her train was one of the lowest. Valentina Sergeyevna Dmitrieva, a radiologist on train number 35, worked with X-ray equipment amid constant power outages. She learned to accurately diagnose injuries with a minimum number of images, which saved scarce X-ray film and electricity. These and many other female medical workers on the medical trains became true heroes of the war. Their dedication, professionalism, and humanity saved tens of thousands of lives. After the war, many of them continued to work in the medical train system, passing on their invaluable experience to a new generation of doctors and nurses. Organizing medical evacuation using medical trains was one of the most difficult logistical tasks of wartime. The system had to run like clockwork, ensuring a continuous flow of wounded from the front to rear hospitals, while making the most efficient use of limited transport resources. The evacuation process began directly on the battlefield, where medics carried the wounded to the medical stations of regiments and divisions. Here, initial sorting took place. The lightly wounded were sent to the nearest medical battalions, while the seriously wounded were sent to loading points for evacuation by medical trains. The loading points were well-organized medical centers located at railway stations in the Frontline zone. Experienced triage doctors worked here, determining in a matter of minutes which wounded soldiers needed immediate evacuation and which could be treated on the spot. The sorting was carried out according to strict medical criteria. First and foremost, the wounded who required urgent surgical care in a hospital setting were loaded. These were soldiers with severe chest and abdominal injuries, traumatic brain injuries, and extensive burns. The loading procedure was worked out in minute detail. The seriously wounded were placed in special ward cars with medical personnel capable of providing qualified assistance en route. The lightly wounded were placed in general cars with minimal medical support. The routes of the medical trains were planned centrally, taking into account the military situation, the condition of the railways, and the workload of the rear hospitals. The dispatch service constantly adjusted plans, redirecting trains to where their help was most needed. They tried to minimize travel time, but trains often moved slowly due to damaged tracks or the need to let military trains pass. Medical staff used this time for intensive treatment, performing operations, blood transfusions, and anti-shock therapy. Communication between medical trains and receiving hospitals was maintained by radio and telegraph. Information about the number and nature of the injuries of the arriving patients was transmitted in advance, which allowed hospitals to prepare for their arrival and distribute the wounded to the appropriate departments. Unloading at rear hospitals was also strictly regulated. Special teams of porters quickly and carefully carried the wounded from the carriages to the reception wards. The seriously ill were taken directly to the operating rooms, while the others were taken to the appropriate wards after a final medical examination. After unloading, the medical trains underwent sanitary treatment, were replenished with medicines, and returned to their new loading points. The entire cycle took from 2 to 5 days, depending on the distance and complexity of the route. Some trains made up to 10 trips a month. The effectiveness of the medical evacuation system was remarkable. The mortality rate among the wounded evacuated by medical trains did not exceed 2 to 3%, which was an outstanding achievement in military medicine. Most of those evacuated subsequently returned to service or were able to lead a full civilian life. The blockade of Leningrad became one of the most tragic episodes of the Great Patriotic War, and medical trains played a special role in rescuing the inhabitants of the besieged city. When German troops closed the encirclement in September 1941, the only connection to the mainland remained the railway across Lake Ladoga. The road of life became a real artery through which food, ammunition, and medicine were delivered to the city, and the wounded, sick, and weakened by hunger residents were evacuated from the city. Medical trains operated under constant shelling and bombing, risking their lives to save others. A distinctive feature of the blockade period was that medical trains carried not only military personnel, but also civilians. Children, the elderly, and people suffering from dystrophy all needed special care during transport. Medical personnel were forced to learn new methods of treating starvation, edema, and vitamin deficiency. Winter trips were especially tough. The temperature in the cars dropped below zero, medicines froze, and weakened passengers couldn't get warm even under all the blankets they had. Doctors came up with different ways to keep warm. They heated bricks and stones in locomotive stoves and used alcohol warmers. Feeding the evacuees was one of the main problems. In conditions of severe shortage, every gram of food counted. The cooks on the medical trains learned to prepare nutritious soups from a minimal amount of grain and vegetables, adding vitamin infusions from pine needles and herbs. Dr. Nina Vasilievna Popova, who worked on one of the blockade medical trains, recalled that every trip was a struggle for the lives of the passengers. Children died of exhaustion right in the carriages, and the elderly could not withstand the difficult journey. But the medical staff did everything possible to get people to their destination alive. Children's medical trains, which specialized in evacuating young Leningraders, played a special role. These trains were equipped with cribs and toys, and had specially trained personnel familiar with child psychology. Many teachers and nurses themselves became foster mothers to orphaned children. Medical trains not only transported people out of besieged Leningrad, but also delivered medicines, donated blood, and medical equipment to the city. Sometimes the trains were turned into mobile blood donation centers, where people donated blood for Leningrad hospitals. The work of medical trains under blockade conditions required special courage from all personnel. German artillery and aircraft constantly shelled the railways, and many trains were blown up by mines or hit directly. Losses among medical personnel were very high. After the blockade was broken in January 1943, the role of the medical trains changed. Now they mainly delivered medical specialists, equipment for the restoration of hospitals, and therapeutic food to the city. Many doctors and nurses volunteered to go to the destroyed city to help its inhabitants. The experience of medical trains in besieged Leningrad became unique in the world practice of emergency medicine. Methods of treating malnutrition, organizing nutrition for weakened patients, and providing psychological support to evacuees were all summarized and used in the further work of the medical service. After the turning point in the war, which came after the victories at Stalingrad and Kursk, Soviet medical trains were given new tasks. The Red Army went on the offensive, liberating occupied territories, and mobile hospitals had to provide medical care during rapid operations. The offensive operations of 1943 to 1944 were characterized by a high pace and a great depth of breakthrough. Medical trains had to keep up with the advancing troops, deploying in the liberated territories and ensuring the evacuation of the wounded from new sections of the front. A distinctive feature of the work during this period was that many railway tracks in the liberated territories had been destroyed by the retreating enemy. Medical trains often operated on restored sections with limited capacity, which required particularly precise coordination of movement. The Belarusian Operation Bagration in the summer of 1944 became an example of brilliant cooperation between the medical service and the advancing troops. Medical trains were deployed in the liberated cities of Minsk, Mogilev, and Vitebsk, providing treatment not only to Soviet wounded, but also to enemy prisoners of war. In the liberated cities, medical personnel often encountered the horrific consequences of the occupation. Local hospitals were destroyed, and medical personnel were either killed or taken to Germany. Medical trains became the only source of qualified medical care for the civilian population. Dr. Alexander Ivanovich Sokolov, who worked on medical train number 29, recalled the liberation of Smolensk. The city lay in ruins, and the hospitals had neither equipment nor medicines. Our train became the first medical facility to begin treating local residents on an equal footing with the military. The Iasi Kishinev operation in Moldova demonstrated the special role of medical trains when surrounded by large enemy groups. The trains worked in cauldrons, evacuating wounded Soviet soldiers and at the same time providing assistance to German and Romanian soldiers who surrendered in accordance with international conventions. The Vistula Oder operation in the winter of 1944 to 1945 required medical trains to operate in particularly difficult conditions. The rapid advance through Poland took place in harsh winter conditions. The railways were clogged with military trains, and medical trains ran on schedules with minimal intervals. In Poland, medical trains encountered mass cases of typhus among liberated concentration camp prisoners for the first time. Special precautions and special methods of treating emaciated people were required. Many doctors risked their own health while working with infectious patients. The East Prussian operation became one of the bloodiest in the final period of the war. Medical trains operated under fierce enemy resistance, often under artillery fire. The capture of Königsberg was particularly difficult, with urban fighting lasting several weeks. As they approached the German border, the medical trains faced new challenges. The German medical system was more developed than in the occupied countries, and Soviet doctors were able to use captured equipment and medicines to treat their wounded. By the spring of 1945, the medical trains were involved in the final operations of the war. The Berlin operation required the maximum effort of all medical services. The trains worked on the approaches to the German capital, evacuating the wounded from the last battles of the bloodiest war in human history. The end of the Great Patriotic War in May 1945 did not mean the end of the work of the medical trains. On the contrary, they faced new, equally important tasks in restoring peaceful life in a devastated country. The transition from wartime to peacetime required a radical restructuring of the entire mobile medical system. The primary task was to repatriate military personnel and civilians from the liberated countries of Europe. Millions of Soviet citizens, prisoners of war, those taken away for forced labor, and evacuees had to return to their homeland. Many of them needed medical care after long years of deprivation. Medical trains ran on routes from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland to various regions of the USSR. The trains were converted to transport not only the sick, but also healthy repatriates. Special attention was paid to the prevention of infectious diseases and quarantine measures. Dr. Elena Mikhailovna Kuznetsova, who worked on a repatriation train, recalled, "People were returning home after many years of separation, but they were physically exhausted and morally depressed. Our task was not only to treat their bodies, but also to support them spiritually and prepare them for their encounter with a changed homeland." The demobilization of a multi-million-strong army also required the active participation of medical trains. Trains ran throughout the country, delivering demobilized soldiers to their hometowns. Many frontline soldiers needed further treatment for their wounds, prosthetics, and sanatorium resort treatment. War invalids constituted a special category. Specialized medical trains were created for them, equipped with rehabilitation facilities, workshops for the manufacture and repair of prostheses, and physical therapy rooms. These trains operated on regular routes, providing continuous medical supervision for the disabled. Restoring the healthcare system destroyed by the war was another important task for the medical trains. In the liberated regions, most hospitals and clinics had been destroyed. Medical trains temporarily served as stationary medical facilities until new hospitals were built. The epidemiological situation in the post-war years remained difficult. The return of millions of people from various European countries created a threat of the spread of infectious diseases. Special anti-epidemic trains traveled around the country, carrying out vaccinations, disinfection, and quarantine measures. Children's medical trains played a special role in post-war recovery. Thousands of children were left orphaned, and many suffered from malnutrition and wartime diseases. Specialized trains transported children to orphanages, sanatoriums, and medical institutions, providing them with comprehensive medical and social assistance. The material and technical base of the medical trains was gradually updated. Military trains were converted for peacetime tasks, and pre-war specialized trains were restored. New types of carriages appeared, equipped with more modern medical equipment. Personnel policy also underwent changes. Many military medics were demobilized and transferred to civilian medical institutions. However, a significant part of the experienced staff remained to work on medical trains, ensuring continuity and the transfer of military experience to the younger generation of doctors. By the end of the 1940s, the USSR's medical train system had been completely reoriented toward peacetime tasks. The experience of wartime was summarized and systematized, and new instructions and methodological guidelines were created. Medical trains became an important part of the Soviet healthcare system, providing medical care in the most remote corners of the country. The 1950s and 1960s were a period of technical revolution in the field of medical trains in the USSR. Post-war economic recovery, industrial development, and scientific and technological progress created the conditions for a radical modernization of mobile medicine. The first post-war models of medical cars differed significantly from their pre-war counterparts. The use of new materials, light alloys, synthetic materials, modern insulation materials, made it possible to create more comfortable and functional medical facilities. The electrification of the railways opened up new opportunities for medical trains. Electric heating and lighting became more reliable, and powerful ventilation systems and air conditioners appeared. Medical equipment received a stable power supply, which significantly expanded diagnostic and treatment capabilities. Particular attention was paid to X-ray equipment. New portable X-ray machines made it possible to conduct examinations directly in the carriages without risk to staff and patients. The first fluorographic units for mass screening of the population for tuberculosis appeared. Laboratory diagnostics also underwent revolutionary changes. Automatic analyzers, electron microscopes, and new methods of blood and urine testing significantly improved the accuracy of diagnostics. Laboratory cars turned into real scientific centers on wheels. The surgical capabilities of medical trains expanded, thanks to the introduction of new methods of anesthesia and surgical techniques. Artificial respiration devices, electrocardiographs, and defibrillators appeared. Operating cars were equipped with shadowless lamps and electrically adjustable operating tables. Pharmaceutical supplies also improved. Pharmacy cars were equipped with modern refrigeration units for storing heat-sensitive drugs, automatic dispensers, and equipment for preparing sterile solutions. The first radioactive drugs for diagnosis and treatment appeared. Communication and control of medical trains reached a new level thanks to the introduction of radio-telephone communication. Trains could maintain constant communication with dispatch services, consult with leading specialists, and coordinate their work with other medical institutions. The automation of many processes became an important area of modernization. Life support systems, heating, ventilation, and water supply were controlled automatically. This allowed medical staff to focus on performing their professional duties. Fundamentally new types of specialized medical trains appeared. Cardiology trains for the treatment of cardiovascular diseases, neurological trains for patients with diseases of the nervous system, and ophthalmological trains for the treatment of blindness. Dental medical trains were equipped with modern equipment, drills, X-ray machines for dental examinations, and filling materials. These trains served the population of remote areas where dental care was unavailable. By the mid-1960s, Soviet medical trains were considered among the most advanced in the world. Foreign specialists studied the Soviet experience, and many technical solutions were borrowed by other countries. The USSR became a recognized leader in the field of mobile medicine. The development of the vast expanses of the North and Siberia became one of the main tasks of the Soviet Union in the post-war decades. The construction of new cities and the development of industry in harsh climatic conditions required the creation of a special medical care system. Medical trains became indispensable assistance in this grandiose project. Northern medical trains operated in extreme conditions that required special technical solutions. The air temperature could drop to -50 degrees and rise to +30 in the summer. Life support systems had to work reliably in such a wide temperature range. Particular attention was paid to the thermal insulation of the carriages. Multi-layer structures with modern insulating materials, triple glazing, and airtight doors and windows were used. Powerful heating systems ran on diesel fuel or electricity, ensuring a comfortable temperature even in severe frosts. Medical equipment was also adapted to the harsh conditions. X-ray machines, laboratory equipment, and surgical instruments had to work reliably at low temperatures. Special antifreeze agents for medical solutions and insulated containers for medicines were developed. The routes of the northern medical trains covered enormous distances. From Murmansk to Norilsk, from Arkhangelsk to Magadan, the trains traveled thousands of kilometers, delivering medical care to the most remote corners of the country. Some trips lasted several weeks. The Baikal-Amur main line became a special testing ground for medical trains. The construction of the BAM required medical care for tens of thousands of builders working in the taiga in difficult conditions. Special medical trains ran along the road under construction, providing assistance for injuries, infectious diseases, and frostbite. Working in conditions of polar night and white nights required special knowledge from medical personnel. Doctors studied the effect of extreme light conditions on the human body and developed methods for preventing seasonal depression, sleep disorders, and vitamin deficiencies. The indigenous peoples of the North gained access to modern medicine thanks to the work of specialized trains. The Nenets, Evenks, Chukchi, and Dolgan, representatives of small peoples, underwent medical examinations, received vaccinations, and were treated for diseases traditional to the North. The fight against tuberculosis among the northern peoples was a particular problem. Special anti-tuberculosis trains ran across the North, conducting mass fluorographic examinations, identifying patients in the early stages, and organizing their treatment in hospitals. Women's and children's medical trains addressed the problems of maternal and child health in the harsh northern conditions. Obstetricians and gynecologists delivered babies right in the train cars, while pediatricians monitored the development of children and administered preventive vaccinations. Scientific research was an important part of the activities of the northern medical trains. Doctors studied human adaptation to extreme climatic conditions, the impact of magnetic storms on health, and the characteristics of various diseases in the Arctic. Supplying the northern medical trains was a complex logistical task. Food, medicine, and fuel were delivered mainly in the summer by sea or air. The trains had to carry significant reserves to operate autonomously for long periods of time. By the end of the 1970s, the medical care system for the North and Siberia, with the help of mobile hospitals, was fully established. Medical trains became an integral part of life in the northern regions, providing equal access to medical care regardless of geographical remoteness. The 1970s and 1980s were the heyday of the medical train system in the USSR. Advances in science and technology and improvements in healthcare organization led to the emergence of fundamentally new types of mobile medical care. Specialization reached such a level that medical trains could solve the most complex medical problems. Oncology trains became one of the most important achievements of this period. Equipped with modern diagnostic equipment, X-ray machines, ultrasound scanners, endoscopic technology, they made it possible to detect malignant neoplasms at an early stage in the most remote areas of the country. The radiology departments of the cancer trains played a special role. Radiation therapy machines, protected by LED screens, made it possible to treat cancer right in the train cars. This was a real breakthrough. Patients received modern treatment without having to travel to regional or national centers. Cardiology medical trains reached an unprecedented level of equipment. Electrocardiographs, echocardiographs, and Holter monitoring systems made it possible to conduct a full diagnosis of cardiovascular diseases. The first installations for emergency cardiac surgery appeared. Neurological trains were equipped with electroencephalographs, electromyographs, and equipment for studying cerebral blood circulation. Rehabilitation departments included exercise machines for restoring movement, electrostimulation devices, and equipment for massage and physiotherapy. Ophthalmological trains became real centers for the fight against blindness. Modern microscopes for eye surgery, laser devices for the treatment of glaucoma and diabetic retinopathy, artificial lenses. All this turned the carriages into full-fledged eye clinics. Dialysis trains solved the problem of treating patients with renal failure in remote areas. Artificial kidney machines made it possible to perform hemodialysis on patients who would otherwise have been doomed. These trains ran on regular routes, providing continuous treatment. Gynecological medical trains were equipped with modern equipment for the diagnosis and treatment of female diseases. Colposcopes, ultrasound machines, and laboratory equipment for cytological studies made it possible to detect cancer in its early stages. Dental trains reached the level of modern dental clinics. Drills with fiber optic lighting, X-ray machines for dental examinations, and modern materials for fillings and prosthetics provided comprehensive dental care. Pediatric medical trains specialized in children's diseases. Incubators for premature babies, artificial lung ventilation devices, and specialized pediatric equipment made it possible to provide qualified care to young patients. Psychiatric trains solved the delicate task of providing psychiatric care in conditions that excluded the stigmatization of patients. Gentle treatment methods, psychotherapy, and occupational therapy were carried out in the calm atmosphere of the sanatorium cars. The introduction of computer technology in the 1980s opened up new possibilities. The first medical computers made it possible to automate diagnostics, maintain electronic medical records, and analyze large amounts of medical information. By the end of the 1980s, the USSR had the world's most developed system of specialized medical trains. More than 300 trains of various types served the country's population, providing equal access to highly qualified medical care regardless of place of residence. The 1990s and the beginning of the new millennium were a turning point for the medical train system. The collapse of the Soviet Union, economic difficulties, and changing priorities in healthcare threatened the existence of a unique mobile medical system that had been created over decades. Many medical trains ended up in various independent states that had formed on the territory of the former USSR. The unified management system was disrupted. Funding was sharply reduced, and many trains were decommissioned or transferred to other departments. It seemed that the era of medical trains was coming to an end. However, life has shown the invaluable importance of mobile medicine for the vast expanses of Russia. With the reduction of the network of medical facilities in rural areas, medical trains have become even more necessary. The Russian government has decided to preserve and develop this area of healthcare. Modern Russian medical trains are significantly different from their Soviet predecessors. The introduction of digital technologies, satellite communications, and modern medical equipment has turned them into high-tech medical centers on wheels. Telemedicine has become one of the main areas of development. Doctors on medical trains can consult in real time with leading specialists in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other medical centers. Test and examination results are transmitted via satellite communication for expert opinions. The diagnostic capabilities of modern medical trains are impressive. Computerized tomography, magnetic resonance imaging, and expert-class ultrasound machines allow for examinations at the level of leading clinics. Laboratory complexes perform hundreds of types of tests. Special attention is paid to preventive medicine. Medical trains conduct medical examinations of the population, identify diseases at an early stage, and organize vaccinations. This is especially important for remote areas where preventive care is often unavailable. Pediatric care has undergone new developments. Specialized pediatric trains are equipped with modern equipment for the diagnosis and treatment of childhood diseases. Particular attention is paid to the psychological comfort of young patients. The cars are decorated in bright colors, and there are playrooms. Gerontological medical trains specialize in the problems of the elderly. With an aging population, this area is becoming increasingly relevant. The trains are equipped with special lifts for patients with limited mobility and are adapted for people with disabilities. Ecological medicine has become a new area of work for medical trains. Special trains investigate the impact of environmental pollution on public health and conduct medical examinations in areas of ecological distress. Currently, there are about 50 medical trains of various profiles operating in Russia. They serve the population of remote areas of Siberia, the Far East, and the North, where the density of medical facilities remains low. Hundreds of thousands of patients receive assistance every year. International cooperation has become an important area of development. Russian experience is being studied by specialists from China, India, and African countries, where the problems of medical care in remote areas are particularly acute. Russia is transferring its technologies and training specialists. The medical trains of the 21st century are not just a tribute to tradition, but a modern solution to the eternal problem of access to medical care. In the age of high technology, they remain indispensable where distances are measured in thousands of kilometers, and the nearest hospital is hundreds of kilometers from home.